to you on this 100% humidity day. But if you were to go up this path, all right, you can see how this goes up very sharply. This would get you up to where Captain George Adams' Battery G, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery was positioned. So the batteries that are firing here at Cool Springs, Union batteries, they all have different types of cannon they're using. And so our artillerist, Al Robertson, he's going to explain all that kind of stuff. But we already know Weir's battery is using ordnance rifles. Battery G, they are using ordnance rifles as well. Battery E are shooting Napoleons, which is a smoothbore gun. And then Battery C, which is on the far northern flank, they are shooting parrot rifles, 10-pound parrot rifles. So as these batteries get into position, their number one goal that evening and that night is to do everything they can to support the infantry on the other side, to make it as difficult as possible for the Confederates to break their line. So there are a couple of things that work in favor for Thoburn's infantry that evening. Number one is the strength of their position. So we're not able to obviously get on the other side of the river, but there is a roadbed that runs along the river, and it is protected by a stone wall. And that stone wall is high enough that these guys are able to load, duck and cover, and then get up. All right, so they can conceal themselves. The other thing that works, of course, in Thoburn's favor is the artillery in the mountains. So if you think about the Rhode Islanders who are going to be up here and Weir's battery, they basically are providing support to Colonel George Welles's brigade, which is confronting attacks from Gabriel Wharton's division. The other Rhode Island battery and Battery E, 1st West Virginia Light Artillery, they are trying to stave off attacks from Robert Rhodes' division. So based on my accounting, all right, there are at least 4 separate infantry assaults the Confederates are making that evening. There could be many more, but at least 4. Now, for the Confederate infantry, it's not a very advantageous thing to do because they're actually attacking downhill. All right, so they're attacking downhill. They're attacking a position that is protected if you're in the Federal infantry. And then you have to deal with the Union artillery. Now, if you're an artillerist up here, this is a moment where you have a great opportunity to show how really good you are at being an artillerist. And so, where's Colonel Cook at? I remember, so Sam Cook is a real bona fide artillerist, retired, right? But Sam also teaches at Shenandoah University. And I remember you came into my class and Jack Owens was super impressed because you're like, I could blow something up at 2.5 miles or whatever. So I guess artillerists like to brag about how much they can blow up, how far away. But these artillerists up here, they are going to have that opportunity. So the distance, depending upon where they're at on the field. So the distance from the Union guns up there to the Confederate attackers, the distance to target is anywhere from 730 yards to about 1,000 yards. And so, obviously, if it's 730 yards, that means you are lobbing shells pretty close to your own troops. So Al Robertson is going to talk about, when we get down to the gun, about how you cut fuses and time those fuses and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not saying there are no friendly fire incidents. There are several. But by and large, they are dropping those shells right. I mean, there might be 10, 15 yards between Union and Confederate troops. They are dropping those shells right on top of the Confederates. All right, and they are wreaking havoc on those Confederate lines. A Union correspondent who was with Adams's battery, so right up here, this is what he wrote about the effectiveness of this fire. At this critical moment, Captain George Adams's Rhode Island battery came into position on an eminence overlooking the valley. They opened upon the enemy, creating great havoc among them. Their range was extremely accurate as each shell burst in the midst of the enemy. Confederates on the other side, who survived the battle, wrote a great deal about how effective the Union gunners were here at Cool Spring. Like, they were in awe of it. And it's kind of one of these, I think, battles sometimes have these moments like you have great fear, right, because people are shooting at you, but you're like, damn, that is really good. And there are a number of Confederates who are writing this, not years after the war, but like days after the battle. There are, for Confederates, unfortunately, some of these guys who are going to be victimized by the Union guns up here in the Heights. And one of those guys is Sergeant Aaron Leonidas DeArmond, this guy right here from the 30th North Carolina. So DeArmond was hit multiple times with artillery shrapnel coming from more than likely either Battery C or Battery E, 1st West Virginia, based on where his unit was at the time of the fight. DeArmond, by the time of the Battle of Cool Spring, was 38 years old. He had been captured multiple times. He had been wounded multiple times. He had a wife and several kids back home. They lived just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. DeArmond, after he was wounded, was taken from the field. Doctors didn't think he had a chance. I mean, there was one Confederate comrade who wrote that he was mutilated by this. Like, he didn't lose any arms or legs, but we're talking, you know, in the trunk of his body. Somehow, some way, DeArmond survives the field hospital. He's sent to Confederate General Hospital in Richmond, or Charlottesville first, and then Richmond. By mid-August, he actually has recovered enough where Confederate doctors in Richmond said, okay, we think it's safe for you to go home now. So he goes home, and when he gets within about 3 miles of his house, he is on foot by this point. Sergeant DeArmond is feeling a little bit weak. He's feeling a little bit tired. And so he thinks, if I could just rest for a little bit, I can muster up enough strength, I'll be able to make it the rest of the way home. He found a chicken coop near the side of the road. Went to that chicken coop, laid down, closed his eyes, and he never woke up. And so, even though the artillery didn't get him here, obviously the effects of being wounded ultimately caught up with him. Now, as the sun starts to go down on the evening of July 18th, Thoburn is going to withdraw the rest of his troops to this side of the Shenandoah. But that does not mean that the fighting is still over. Because for several hours after he withdraws, so probably somewhere by 8:30 p.m., guys are starting to come across. By 9 o'clock, they're all across to this side. And going up towards midnight, Union artillery in the bluffs and gunners from George Chapman's battery, Lowry's battery, and Bryan's battery, so 3 Confederate batteries on the other side, and these are all mixed batteries shooting a mix of rifle and smoothbore guns. They are dueling with each other. And again, it's one of these things from the perspective of a soldier. You have to think how terrifying this is, but also how very cool it is as well. Sergeant Milton Humphreys, who was a Confederate artillerist in Bryan's battery, this is what he wrote in his diary on that night of July 18, 1864. It was now fully dark, and the scene was beautiful. From the flash of the guns, we could see the shell coming like a meteor. And then came the noise of the shell, and lastly, the report of the guns. Now, for the gunners, the Confederate artillery is not taking out a single Union cannon. However, there is infantry support. So, for example, the 121st New York is behind Adams's battery. They are taking casualties. But also, we have men still out here that night in these fields from Ricketts' division, as well as some troops from Thoburn's command before they make their way back up into Snickers Gap, who are out here and who are being victimized by this artillery just sitting there. And so we're going to move out in that direction. I'll take questions if you have them, and then talk about those guys that Ricketts said, don't want to cross them because I don't want to get them killed. Now this is precisely what's happening as they're sitting there. and Confederate artillery shells are landing short. Questions? Sam?
So the artillery duel that was occurring during darkness, any results against the artillery? You said the Confederate artillery is mostly against the Union infantry, but is there any counter to that? Do they suffer?
Yes. So the Union artillery is able to. So the infantry, when the Federal infantry withdraws, basically what's going to happen, Confederate infantry is going to rush to the shoreline, and they're going to be on the opposite side of that stone wall. And they actually start building barricades because they don't know if the Federals are going to launch a counterattack at some point. But the batteries that are in the mountains up here, they will actually drive off those Confederate cannons, all three of those batteries, because at this point, Jubal Early thinks there's nothing to be gained, right? So our goal is to just make certain the Federals don't cross, and if we leave our batteries here and we know how effective the Union guns have been, there's really no point. Any other questions? Oh. Okay.